What would be a way that you could describe this kind of deeper, genuine happiness? What other related yearnings, heart desires can you think of? Tranquility, yeah, tranquility. And, that's an excellent one because, the direct equivalent to tranquility is peacefulness. And many, many people, when you ask them, what do you really want in life? What would you love to have? Many people put as the very first, number one choice, peace of mind. Right? Many people do. I've seen that in surveys. Right? So there's this feeling that, okay, yes, it would be nice to have a nice warm house and a family and this and that, but what I really want is peace of mind. Just to have that inner sense of calm and tranquility. So that's a very significant element of genuine happiness, tranquility, peace of mind. We could think of a sense of well-being, some inner quality, so that it doesn't really matter so much whether the outer circumstances are positive or negative. There's an inner resource, an inner strength, you could say, even. Being on an even keel. So there's just a sense of well-being. And there are many things, of course, which feed into that. Welcome. No, please. If you find the chairs a little bit hard, then you can put a cushion on it if you find that helpful. Yeah. So, there are many things that feed into this sense of well-being. For example, it's hard to have a sense of well-being, as I said before, if you're really hungry or impoverished. So there are certain definite worldly bounty, we could say, that helps generate this sense of well-being. But a deep sense of well-being goes beyond that worldly bounty, right? Because you find people who are surrounded by every desirable worldly happiness you can imagine, living in palatial estates and having the best prepared food and so forth, but they don't really have a sense of well-being. Anyone looking at their life from the outside would think, oh, they must feel very good, but that's not always the case. Often those people live lives of as acute desperation as people who are impoverished. That can happen. So when we talk about well-being, we are partly talking about the external circumstances of our life, but again, more deeply, it's an inner balance, an inner state. Okay. Anything else come to your mind when you think of, if you try to imagine what would have to occur or what has occurred into my life at those moments when I feel genuine happiness, true sense of well-being, peacefulness? Anything else comes to your mind? Purpose and meaning. The idea that we're not just surviving on this earth, but that we're alive, we're living, that there's like a kind of a direction, a meaning, a purpose to life. A lot of times people, again, they may have all the other attributes of happiness, but it's as if they're a ship on the ocean not going anywhere, kind of just drifting. But then those people who have a purpose or direction in their life, then that's conducive to a deeper sense of well-being. Certainly, that's the case. And it's kind of interesting. I think it's been a philosophical question for some time in the West, I think, from what I understand, is does meaning and purpose, does it itself have meaning? In other words, is it a valid question? Is there such a thing as meaning and purpose? And I think it's a big philosophical debate, but I think we can cut through with it when we just accept the fact that we make our own meaning. It doesn't matter whether it's God-given or existing externally or some kind of hardwired experience, but when we create meaning and purpose in our life, that's what the meaning and purpose of our life is. We can choose it. We can fabricate it. We can construct it. And then it becomes, if it actually serves the purpose to give us a sense of genuine peace and happiness and well-being, then of course it is meaningful. It is purposeful. Even if it is something which in the ultimate analysis is something that we created in our own mind. Okay? So we have all of these things. We also, did you have one? Right. Love, harmony with others. This sense of that our interactions with others are taking place on a level outside of petty, narrow, selfish concern, but a kind of heart-to-heart communication. And I think there are different ways of referring to that. In my mind, it's sort of like the truly creative power of the mind, or the fulfillment of our inner potential. So we have a potential, activated to a certain extent, to open our hearts to others. Right? I mean, our hearts are open to our children, to our loved ones, to our pets, and so forth. There is an ability to get beyond petty, selfish concerns and really feel that expansiveness of love and so forth. Well, genuine happiness would be the ability to cultivate that to an immeasurable degree, so that whoever we turn our mind to, in whatever circumstance, the basic mode of our communication, of our contact, is this loving kindness and compassion. So fulfilling our inner potential for love, for compassion, for insight, that would be genuine happiness. The person, the teacher from whom I'm most indebted to this particular way of formulating the Tonglen practice, his name is Alan Wallace. A number of you may have met him or read some of his books. Excellent teacher, excellent translator. He introduced a word, a Greek word, which just went out of my memory. Apparently it goes all the way back to at least Aristotle. It'll come back, but it's not there now. But he said that the closest translation of this word is flourishing. There it is. There it is. Where did you hear that word? History of philosophy, right. XZQ. Okay. Just ask Aristotle, he'll know. And so this is a sense that, again, as indicated before, that we're not just alive on the planet, just surviving, just making it from day to day, but that we're flourishing. You know, the way a garden, you can have plants in the garden, they haven't died yet, but they're not flourishing. But then you can have a garden in which all the plants there are flourishing, and we know the difference. Well, we know the difference for ourselves, feeling truly alive, really flourishing. So all of these things, tranquility, peace, scope for our creative powers, a sense of well-being, fulfillment, flourishing, whether in English or in Greek, all of these can be said to be components of what we would call genuine happiness, as opposed to a kind of a superficial, simply pleasurable experience. Okay. So it's getting in touch with our own yearning to experience such genuine happiness that serves as the beginning, the introduction to this meditative state. And when we use a word like yearning or desire, especially if we've received other teachings in Buddhism, we might, kind of a red flag might go up. We might have heard those teachings in Buddhism that say that the cause of all suffering is desirous attachment, or that nirvana is a state of desirelessness, being without desires. So then what's this yearning? What's this desire? Is that sneaking in through the back door somehow? Well, when we start examining it closely, the desires that are to be overcome are desires, just to give them a label, to encapsulate them, what we might call worldly or mundane desires, are desires for things that don't have the ability to give us what we're looking for. Right? So if our desires for happiness are focused on the new car that's parked in our driveway, well, it's going to be shortchanged. It's going to be disappointed, because the new car parked in the driveway only has the ability to give us very limited momentary pleasure. It doesn't have the ability to satisfy that inner longing for happiness. And in fact, the desire that we have for that car often leads to suffering. For example, suffering when it gets scratched or dented, when it goes old, when we can't sell it, when it gets involved in an accident, when it's stolen. Right? The more desire we had for it in the first place, the more those experiences create suffering. Okay? So it's those mundane worldly desires that are to be overcome. But deep in the human heart, there are other desires. There are other yearnings. And this yearning for genuine happiness is a chief among those. Okay? So getting in touch with them is not a mistake. It's really understanding the that inner call. That inner voice. That I like to think of it as something in Buddha's own life. If you know of his life, the first 29 years of his life he spent in as much luxury as his father could set up for him, because his father didn't want him to become dissatisfied with the royal life and leave, as the prediction was. He wanted to keep him trapped in the royal life. So he bestowed on him every possible pleasure that he could think of. And but there was a certain sense in Siddhartha, the prince who became Buddha, was there a certain sense in Siddhartha's mind that there was meant to be something else. And so, as the story goes, he was lying on his wife's lap, listening to the musicians play this beautiful music and this singer making up a song as she went on. And he had this yearning for something beyond what he knew, as if there was something else he was supposed to be doing with his life. That kind of inner call, that inner yearning. And then the way the story goes was that the song that the singer was making up at the moment was about beautiful places she had seen or heard about outside the palaces. And so when this story was over, Siddhartha said, "Is it true? Are there such beautiful places in the world?" And she says, "Yes, the palaces are lovely, but I've heard of other places. I've seen other places that are really wonderful." And that kind of somehow caught the prince's imagination, like that yearning, that what's over the next hill. Up to that point, he had been quite satisfied with what was around him. But that kind of inner voice, that inner dissatisfaction made him want to find more. Now, what happened then was that he went out of into the capital city, and then, just as his father had feared, he saw the realities of sickness, old age, and death, and a wandering mendicant who was intent on following the path, giving up the household life and following the path to spiritual fulfillment. And so when Siddhartha received those visions, the three of suffering and then the one of a path to a deeper understanding of reality, overcoming of suffering, then at that point he went to his father, said, "I'm giving up this life, I'm leaving." Right? All his father's worst fears. Right? But it only came about, or the stimulus for that was from that longing for something else, kind of an unnamed longing. So it's quite significant for us to tune into that, to have an image of what our life would be like were we experiencing genuine happiness. And it doesn't have to be as hypothetical as that, because I think all of us, at some point or other in our existence, have touched this. There have been moments when we felt incredibly peaceful, creative, fulfilled, and the like. A sense that we were flourishing. And it might be a good idea, before we begin, just to bring to mind some of those instances. We could think of, particularly loving relationships that we've been part of, that have brought us out of ourself and have opened our heart. We could think of experiences of bounty, not just external material bounty, not simply, when the environment is manifesting in such a way that it feels full. We don't have to exclude that, but not just limited to that, but also the bounty of our heartfelt response to that. This sense of, instead of feeling deprived, feeling abundant, like that. What we could call genuine goodness. A quality that exists in the world, that exists within us, and that is there whether the outer conditions are conducive or not. We're trying to touch that. And we're approaching it by remembering those times when we touched that goodness, when we experienced that peacefulness of mind, and so forth. It's not significant that it doesn't last, or it hasn't lasted up till now. What's significant is that we've had those moments when we've recognized it. And the spiritual path is, we could perhaps explain it in terms of moving from these transient, momentary experiences of happiness to what we might call everlasting happiness, in which the mind is so strong in and of itself, so peaceful, that like a Buddha's mind is said to be everlastingly blissful. Even it's not even disturbed when a Buddha sees something that's sad or that brings up sadness. That still doesn't have the ability to destroy that inner blissful, calm awareness. So we have a kind of a sense, an intimation of that in our experience, in our, occasionally in our everyday experience. So what we're trying to do is just get into the memory of that, bring that up as the basis for cultivating this genuine, lasting happiness. When we conceive of the source of our happiness or pleasure as being external to us, like the car out in the driveway, or something like that, then the most that can give us is the momentary pleasure when our senses come into contact with that thing. And afterwards either it gets cloying and turns into its opposite, or it just fades away. So it's transient, right? So that's kind of momentary pleasure. That's kind of like the defect or the faults of momentary pleasure. But as you said, it's when the source of that is focused on something external to the mind. But when we follow it back and look into the mind itself, then the mind does have the ability to experience a beyond momentary pleasure, a true sense of peacefulness and well-being. And those experiences are, in a certain real sense, eternal experiences. And we tend to think of eternal meaning something that lasts forever. But that's not actually what eternal means. Or that's not the only thing eternal can mean. When we have an experience of a deep, abiding peace, well-being, genuine happiness, flourishing, that's a moment out of time. It's eternal. It's outside of time. Right? You could clock it on your watch and say, it lasted 30 seconds or 4 minutes or something like that. But while one's in it, it's as if one's made contact with something unborn and unceasing. It's sort of like the eternal qualities of the world have intersected with our experience. There's some chairs here or on the floor. And if you do choose a chair, if it's kind of rough, you might want to put a cushion on it or a pad if you find that a little bit uncomfortable. Okay? So I think the question that you're bringing up is an extremely important and valid one, because it's like the hope here, or the promise we could say, is that there's an inner source of happiness, which as we touch it and as we cultivate it, as we build it up, becomes truly eternal. Not just eternal in the sense of out of time, but eternal in the sense that it's there forever. It's always available. And so these meditative techniques of remembering those moments when we felt that peacefulness, that sense of well-being, that sense of flourishing, that sense of creativity, which touched us on a deep level, those are ways